Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the weekly live stream for the Restituta Orbis channel. And after a little bit of a hiatus, we have returned to explore the next reset forward to the 6th era. And I'd like to extend a warm greetings to all Prime explorers, regular viewers, and all others joining us. All are welcome here as we explore the next reset. Now, I'm not really going to belabor this because we have a lot to cover. And I'm going to highlight certain comments that really cater to exactly what we're talking about. But the first question that we have is, why would anyone want to have a reset? Especially if things are going according to plan. If this is exactly what you need and you have a civilization, a society that's operating according to someone's design, or at least it's going the way that they think it should be going. Now, I'm not suggesting there's any sort of controllers or leaders that actually influence anything, merely hypothetically speaking, of course, that we have a situation where it's status quo. And it's exactly what people who have influence, we'll say it that way, people, things, some other power, we've discussed it many times before, the ancient enemy, different theories. Why would they want to have a reset if things are going particularly well? Why would they want to progress things to a 6th era? So it's a bit of a hypothetical discussion that we're going to have. We're going to try to answer that question, why there'd be a reset. And of course, we'll answer that question by looking at past resets, looking at some of the evidence that we have. And here's something else I want to go into. We also want to look at what the 6th era may look like, or perhaps I should say, what possibilities the 6th era could look like. And it's probably not at all limited like any of us think that it could be. So we start by taking a look at an old exploration, Tartaria Final Conflict. The question really comes, what came first? Was it the corruption of the previous civilization, which on this channel we refer to as Tartaria? Was that what it was actually called? Probably not, but that's a little bit of an honorary term that we assign to it, and it's recognized by other individuals, other entities, if you will. So it's really just for recognition. But on this channel, we officially refer to it as the 4th era civilization, or the civilization that preceded ours. And that question comes down, what came first? Was that civilization corrupted, or was it destroyed from the inside out by the ancient enemy? We don't really know for sure, but we have a couple different theories in terms of exactly what happened. And it's because of that, why and what happened, and always asking those who, what, where, when, and why, that's how we're really able to formulate a theory in terms of what happened. Now, all of you who are listening so far and talking amongst yourselves, what do you think happened first? Do you think that the ancient enemy defeated the previous civilization and then the reset happened, or that components, segments, portions of the previous civilization survived, and towards the reset, it wasn't until after the reset that the final remnants of that civilization, the 4th era civilization, Tartaria, were completely destroyed? And, there's a lot of different theories. And, Robert goes with the prevailing theory that we have, which most of the evidence that we can still see, it's both. And we always talk about that. Why do we spend so much time exploring the 4th era theory? It's because we have the most remaining evidence from the 4th era theory. And here's a question from Vaughn, and it's a very legitimate question. Did anything happen at all? Or is it all just in our minds? Yes, that's part of the reality explorations. Well, for this particular exploration, we're going with the theory that, yes, something did happen. Yes, there is a physical timeline that we can match and look at. And we ask that question, what happened first? Was the 4th era civilization corrupted, or was it defeated? A couple explorations we've looked at in the past is the corruption of that previous civilization, the loss of balance between the individual and the society, which from our theories seems to be one of the key components that people were able to exist in this civilization. Now, other explorers and other people have their own theories about what the civilization was, who it was. Certainly, we've come to the conclusion that our main theories, and whether you agree with them or not, that's completely okay. I say "are" because those are the theories that we share on the channel, is that it was a civilization that achieved balance between the individual and society. Certainly, we could argue that we don't necessarily have that balance in our current civilization. Some would argue that in some places we do, and maybe we do. But we're not talking about our current civilization in this exploration. We're talking about the previous one. So Why have a reset? Well, if the reset, the question is the reset a cyclical event that happens because of forces beyond the control of anyone, a natural event? Or is it a combination? Is it a known natural event that occurs on a cycle, and then some force, some power that perhaps has knowledge and prepares for it takes advantage of it after the fact? And those are always the questions that we have. And really, that's really the best way to be. Try to be open to everything and don't know at the end of the day. And it's one of the hardest things for any of us to admit, because we believe that we know exactly what it may be. It may be a cycle of 100 years, 138 years, 150 years, or it could happen every 40 minutes. Or if you go to the Matrix example, it happens every 46 seconds you watch that movie, Matrix Reloaded. The film itself was a big reset. Not a good example. But we look at some of these images that we have, thinking of previous resets, and what's the evidence? Why would someone want to reset a civilization? Well, if that civilization represented interests that certain influential powers, or whatever we want to say that they are, don't necessarily agree with, then that would be a reason to reset a civilization. Or do you simply want to keep people in a constant state of confusion, diaspora, and constant dysphoria, the two Ds? Something that seems to be inflicted on people all the time. You could even make the argument that those two processes are still inflicted on our current civilization. And Frank's right, the Bologna Towers. We're going to take a couple different looks at the Bologna Towers, because it does seem in the past that these towers existed and they represented giant skyscrapers, or at least what we think that they are. Were they skyscrapers, or are they really just towers for defensive purposes, as the official history tells us? Well, maybe they could have been used for both purposes. Maybe they had many more purposes. They're very interesting, though, because they're represented through the official history. And a few of them still exist to this day, so you can go visit them and assess them. Now, does anybody know where this particular location is? Or should I say was? It doesn't necessarily exist like this today. Don't fear truth. Looks like a model. Well, this was very much not a model. This was very real at one point in time. Adam offers natural cycle of human instinct. Hard times make strong men. Possibly. And it's also said that easy times make weak men. So they say. Oh, everyone's guessing that. Not exactly. You got the right nation, though. It is Germany. Oh, good one, good one. No, this is not Iowa. Although, of course, the connection would be, well, because Iowa was settled by Germans, just like Wisconsin. That's why the architecture matches. No. This is Germany. You are correct. But we're in Germany. Oh, yeah, Vaughn. Definite loops and cycles. Kansas. Yeah, there you go. That's a good guess. Ah, look, somebody got it. Charles Anthony. Yes, that is Berlin. Berlin, a city that's been through a lot of transition, namely through conflict, but also through other reasons. And Berlin has also been one of those cities that's been modernized. And don't get me wrong, I mean, all those cities are quite interesting over in Germany, whether we're talking about Munich or Cologne. But yes, we are looking at Berlin here. And we're going to look at some accounts of Berlin a little bit, just for some evidence. Now, going back to the 5 eras theory, why would someone want to cause a reset in the previous eras? Well, if we look at the original eras, and remember, this is a theory. This is not a hard, fast fact. And I'm not going to present a theory as a fact. I'm not going to present it as a hypothesis either. Just a little bit of a joke there. But why would someone want to cause a reset in one of these previous eras? Well, it could be that it's a natural cyclical event. We have several schools of thought, several religions, several belief systems, however you want to define them, that indicate that our entire existence operates on a cyclical existence. And there's also a lot of other alternative researchers. You know, we talked about it. Some believe it's a couple hundred years. Some believe it's just over 100 years. Some think it's many, many more. Chassis, it's great to see you. I just wanted to say hello. And then Robert summarizes it very nicely: to gain control again, because it is possible that these interests have lost control over time. And as a result of it, they want to reimpose that control, or they want to create conditions where they have the opportunity to regain control. And if not necessarily the kind of control that we think of. See, the issue that we have is our minds are locked into thinking that there is a lot of simple control. And yes, fear is a wonderful way to create control. And Captain Picard gives a great speech about fear in the season 3 Star Trek Next Generation episode, Who Watches the Watchers? And he does it in a couple sentences. Yes, that's classic Captain Picard. You won't hear current Captain, Admiral, retired, Android Picard, whatever he is, talking about fear. No. So KC933 says, lost control by giving us the illusion of freedom. Many illusions, theatricality, and deception. Absolutely. Eric Red here with an interesting comment. Apex predation. Yes, that could always be a part of it in some way, shape, or form. And Stanley here says they rule from the underground, perhaps, or maybe in some other physical or maybe even an existence that we don't fully understand, something that we're somewhat aware of. If you ever go back and you watch that wondrous and very intriguing film with Charlton Heston, Soylent Green, you have to ask yourself, where do the higher forces of that society actually reside? Do they really reside in that decimated dystopian existence? It's very, very intriguing. We'll look at a couple different examples. But the best example that we have, and you'll notice that in the 5 eras timeline, about 66% of it, or 2/3, is comprised of the 4th and the 5th era, the era that we reside in, the 5th era, and then the 4th era, the eras that we know the most about. And keep in mind that most of what we know about the 4th era, it's theoretical. We don't know the exact details. We don't know what happened. We have some ideas. And so then you say, well, why do you posit that there are 3 previous eras? Well, it's going off of a couple different belief systems. It's also compositing the evidence that we've looked at with foundations to a lot of the structures, foundations to cities. The fact that official history does verify that cities are built on the foundations of previous cities. And you've heard that. And, it's more than a cliche. And you can go watch the old Indiana Jones movies and you'll even hear him say it. Yes, the city of Alexandretta, the modern city of Iskenderun, is built on the modern city of where Alexandretta was. Okay, I can't do a very good John Rhys Davies, excuse me. My English accent's not working. I've not been back to the UK, so need to get back to Newcastle upon Tyne. But it goes off of that you understand that the foundation eras are called that because they are the original cities, the original civilization that things were built on. How fantastic was it? We don't know. Basically, the limits of our imagination. We do have a better idea of what the previous civilization was before us, though, because we suspect there's a lot of remnants that are still within our contemporary era. But back to that original question, why have a reset? Because clearly the 4th era civilization represented a threat to the interests of this ancient enemy, this force from a different realm of existence. We're not exactly sure. We have different theories, and of course we have many people who seem to think that it's just people amongst our own people that are responsible for it. And for some reason, that theory gets a lot of reinforcement every single day. Now, I can't rule it out, but I do find it interesting that that's what we hear the most, how shall we say, fact and theory presented, or theories presented as facts. I'm not saying there was a scientist that did that. No scientist ever presented theory as fact. But, if you ever did that, then you're not exactly abiding by the scientific method, are you? So, and every theory is as good as any other. Maybe that's just a way to actually visualize what this ancient enemy is. We just don't know. And Old World Delaware says it in a very simple way. Restart the computer. Maybe the game is just not going the way I want it to go. And so that's where the reset comes into play. Now, if anybody remembers, and I'm going to date myself here, your old Atari 2600, when things weren't going well on Star Master, you just clicked the reset switch. Boom. And then you started the game over, hoping to do better. Maybe, just maybe, you could actually destroy all the aliens and get the high rank. But anyways. Angel Dreams, perhaps all the eras are happening at the same time. And that's another good consideration. Maybe the eras are happening at the same time. What exactly is time? Another one of those good discussions that we can have in a future exploration. But again, for the purposes of this one, we are going by the theory that time is linear. Yes, one of the best scientific discussions that they had in Star Trek Deep Space Nine about linear time. But do we really exist in linear time? It's up to debate. Even that's theoretical in a lot of ways. So moving on from the 5 eras theory, I want to highlight the example of the 1976 film Logan's Run, starring Michael York, Jenny Agutter, and Richard Jordan. And what's really intriguing about Logan's Run is it's a film that'll show you an example of what a reset will look like. There is a reset that occurs towards the end of the film, albeit an accidental reset. There's a reset that occurred before the film starts that the characters have vague knowledge of. And if you're not familiar with the film, what's happened is it's set in the 23rd century on the official chronology. and there's some catastrophe that's destroyed humanity, and the survivors live in these dome cities. And they live in relative pleasure in these dome cities. They live a leisurely life, very, very hedonistic. But there's a catch. When you turn 30, you have to report to Carousel, and that's what you see all these individuals who have turned 30, Capricorn 6s, as the film says, and they get zapped up in this carousel. Now, these individuals believe that if they reach the top, they're going to renew. And the people crowded around watching this macabre display are shouting, renewal, renewal. But what you don't realize, or at least what they're not aware of, is they all get blasted by lasers, and none of them actually renew, which is what the city computer confirms for the main character, Logan. You mean no one's ever renewed? No, no one's ever renewed. Well, actually, it doesn't say anything, but very disturbing scene. The reason I highlight the film is because what you have in it is an example of an entire civilization, an entire society that is created and actually run by a computer. Now, we can go back and forth and argue if the city computer that runs the city in the film Logan's running, no, I'm not talking about the TV series, we're just talking about the film, is it actually just a program or is it artificial intelligence? Of course, that's up for discussion because what's artificial intelligence these days? Whatever we say it is, right? No, kidding. We're going back to the 20th century sci-fi definition of artificial intelligence, having sentience and the ability to impose self-agency. And what we realize in this film is that this computer does not truly have self-agency. It may have some limited sentience, but it can't really decide what it wants to do on its own. It's acting in accordance with the program. And that's kind of one of the limits of the entire city. And what you find out is that these people who live in this entire civilization, this society that's been created, it's completely fictional. But every detail behind it, the colors, the symbols, the classifications for ages of people, it's all entirely created. And I think that's what makes it a very interesting film. And the fact that it shows you what things may look like in a hypothetical civilization, or who knows, maybe it actually looks like things looked like in the distant past. Now, does anybody know what this particular print that we're looking at is from, or what it's a representation of? Is this a real print? Is this an artistic print? Or is this something that was made at some point in time? Charles Anthony, Hollywood can never make a film like Logan's Run today. Nope, nothing even close would ever get greenlit. Absolutely not. Heidi, acting driven, she's special effects, influential, however. Well, yeah, I suppose so. If that's what you want to evaluate, the special effects, be my guess. It was a lot more practical effects driven. Reality Elevator. A while ago, there was a program to get paid for sterilization. Well, there's actually a series of programs from multiple nations that tended to operate along those lines. It's quite intriguing. And Golden Child definitely looks artistic. Artist. Sean Sylvester says 4 Theradomes around the entire world equal 1 civilization. Maybe so. Maybe so. Reminds me of my reprint of the Strasbourg Cathedral book during the Napoleonic era. So what you're looking at here is an artistic rendering that's taken from one of the early stories, it doesn't matter which one, of the tales of the settlement of Berlin. Yes, isn't this interesting? A city that's always been there, and yet there are actual written accounts that indicate that this city was explored. Now, this is easily explainable. I'm not saying that this necessarily proves anything that's amiss, but it is questionable. Now, you could probably explain it by saying, well, it was simply the tour guide, if you will. Someone was doing a little bit of a tour guide, and they wanted to guide other nobles, other people of the high element of society in the 1700s in terms of what Berlin looks like. But the descriptions are rather fantastic when you read some of these accounts, and it gives you the impression that these people are not necessarily touring Berlin, that they just discovered Berlin and they're exploring it. Now, the dialogue, or maybe I should say the writing, doesn't say that overtly, but it does hint towards that. Now, you could say, yes, you're just driving out conclusions from that which is implied. It's entirely possible. But it's interesting when you consider that there are many different drawings that are attributed to this time, whether they were done by official architects, draughtsmen, or whoever, and what were they really capturing. And there's always that problem that we have where we try to deconflict what was built by the Romans, what was built during the so-called Middle Ages or the Dark Ages. Of course, we don't call it the Dark Ages anymore because as historians in the early 1900s told us, it really wasn't that bad of a time. Remember, they had the University of Bologna. People were learning, and we had the Renaissance, and it really wasn't the Dark Ages. However, the official history still says that Rome has been rediscovered many times. Great comment there, Abbott. Faulty towers. Yes, faulty towers. Where's John Cleese when you need him? But who really knows exactly what the explanation behind it is? You know, are they Phoenician tiles, or does that pattern have a completely different origin? Is that just the origin that we're going off of right now? And Kathy with a good comment here, capturing the imagination. Yes, in many ways, shapes and forms, that's exactly what it was doing. Now, here's a picture of what the initial look of the Dome City on the outside of Logan's Run looked like. And yes, it was a very rudimentary 1970s practical effect on a miniature set. And I'm sure there's somebody out there that would say, if I use this as a thumbnail, that's an AI-produced image. Yes, I'm sure somebody out there would say that. Now, what always interested me the most about Logan's Run, if you decide to go back and watch that film from 1976, you got Logan 6, Michael York on the right, and then you've got Francis 7, portrayed by Richard Jordan on the left. For those of you who don't remember Richard Jordan, he was in Gettysburg, and he played I'm not going to go into it. It's not really relevant, but he was also in the Titanic, Raise the Titanic. The guy showed up in a lot of different places. But what you have here with these two characters, they both go on a journey where they find out that their entire world is not as they understand it. They think their entire world is this city that's under this dome that they are citizens of. They are also policemen of, called Sandmen. That's a reference to the original book. But it should be noted that the film deviates quite a bit from the original book. For example, they were called Sandmen in the book because they gave people a sleeping solution and put them to sleep in the sleep shop. And that's how they brought about the end of the 30-year lifespan. In the film, it was the carousel. So very, very inspired, I think. But that's just my opinion. Maybe you think they should have stuck with a book. It doesn't really matter. But what you have is Michael York on the right, the character of Logan. He's the one who goes through the journey, and he's the one who's able to actually make the leap that reality, his understanding of the world, is not what he sees it as. Whereas Francis, he sees the same things that Logan does, but he can't make that leap. He can't make that intellectual, that mental leap to really see the world differently. And in the film, Francis does have some redeeming characteristics. He actually goes out of his way to save his old friend Logan when he thinks that Logan has betrayed their cause. But Francis does see the fact that the world is not as they think it is, but he can't accept it. And right to his dying moment, he still believes that Logan renewed. And it's a very tragic moment, but it's very, very well acted. And it shows you the difference between one character that can accept change from their perception of reality and one that cannot. That's why this film, I think, resonates. And you're absolutely right. This film would never be made today. And always going back to the symbolism of the carousel and the life clock. And that's what you see in the middle of the carousel here. The giant symbol of the life clock that every single character or every citizen of the city has implanted in their hand. And once it starts blinking red, well, that's when it's your time to report the carousel. And from your understanding, you have just as good a chance as anyone else to reach the top, and maybe you'll be renewed. But what Logan finds out is nobody gets renewed. Everybody gets zapped by a laser. And the city will just bring about a newborn that will replace the individual that was lost in the population. And so it's a stagnated culture run by a computer that's going nowhere. Everybody's hedonistic. They live ostensibly a good life, but it's only 30 years long. And so the film revolves around breaking out of those boundaries. And Sharon with a good comment here. It's like a reflection of controlled lifespans that have no doubt been happening for real. Yeah, in a lot of ways. Yeah, maybe we do need to graduate, Vaughn. It's a very, very good point. So, also want to consider all these images that we have of the concept of dome cities. They've always been with us. Now, this was a concept for putting a geodesic dome over New York City, Manhattan to be specific. And you've probably also seen artwork and other ideas about putting a giant airfield on top of Manhattan Island. Because, you know, the nearest airfield is LaGuardia, which is not actually on Manhattan. Now, I know what you're going to say. Really? And you're crazy. It's actually on Manhattan. Okay. Convince me, right? I'm being a little facetious here, but I always found the access to New York City with LaGuardia and JFK quite interesting. And I do remember some things differently in the past that seem to have changed, but this isn't really the time to discuss it. So the concept of domes, geodesic domes, and where they appear. We also, again, go back to the city of Bologna in Italy, where we have this interesting drawing, this print, that seems to depict a giant dome over Bologna. So what if there is an entirely different story behind Bologna that alters or differs from our understanding of the official history quite extensively? That this was a city from the Fourth Era that survived whatever natural forces of the Fourth Era reset there were, whether it was a plasma fire, a mud flood, a plasma fire, a mud flood, and an actual flood, or something much worse. There may be some other force that we don't even understand. That might even be it. We haven't even looked at all the theories. But this city was set up to survive, and that's why so much of it was preserved. Again, it's just a theory. We don't really know. But it is very interesting that we have these concepts of these dome cities, whether it's a science fiction movie that was made or released in 1976, a concept for a geodesic dome over Manhattan in New York, 1940s and 1960s, and then the drawing from whenever the heck the drawing was officially done. Was this from the 1700s or the 1800s? Hard to say, who knows? Or maybe it was even done later. But the concept, the idea that Bologna was also protected by a dome. And then even going to this little screenshot here when Logan and Jessica, when they escaped the city and they reached the remnants of Washington, D.C. And it's very peculiar that if you go and you watch this movie, you'll see that all the structures that actually survived are structures that we just happen to affiliate with legitimate old world structures. So very, very intriguing. And that's what we all have in the way these things connect. So why have a reset? Well, it's simple. You keep people in a constant state of diaspora and dysphoria. People don't have their identity. You can impose an identity upon people then. You can give them a new group. You can give them a new identity. And therefore, you can send them wherever you want them. They'll do exactly what you tell them to do. That's why you have a reset. It makes it a lot more easy to manage a society and a civilization, especially if you have that which is most threatening to that civilization. And what is that? Well, it's a strong, independent individual. And strong, independent individuals that can work together and establish their own self-agency. So that is why you have a reset. Again, it's just a theory. So anyways, we go to the next topic. Please hit the like button, and thank you everybody for coming, and we appreciate your presence here, and please continue contributing those comments. So we'll move on. Are resets a cycle? And give me one moment. We're going to go to the next set of images concerning ourselves with the cycle of resets. And why and where does the concept of the 5 eras theory actually come from? Well, there's a better graphic display of that than I'm going to show you right now. And can everybody see this relatively well? Let me make sure that this is all loaded and go full screen on this. And what you have here are the 5 human generations. There's different ways of saying this from classical Greek or the civilization of Greece. We see that there were 5 ages or the 5 human generations. And this is actually the concept that inspired the 5 eras theory. And there's been other explorers that have looked at it long before I did. And you know who they are. The Golden Age, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, the Age of Heroes, and the Iron Age. And you look at the descriptions of how each of these ages are. And perhaps these ages do correspond with the 5 eras. The first era through the third era, the Golden through the Bronze Age. In the first era, humans, or what we consider humans, were as advanced as what we call deities now. They had unlimited lifespans. They had unlimited capabilities. And perhaps they even had the ability to jump between many different realms of existence. They could exist physically, while they were also aware of existing ethereally. And then as time went on, the Silver Age, the Bronze Age, their capabilities diminished. Their lifespan diminished. So we got to the Iron Age, which is the current age, where it's said that children have gray hair and people don't live very long at all. Now, that's not what mainstream history will tell you, and that's not what science will tell you. It'll tell you that wrong. We have evolved, we have increased our technology, and we have increased our lifespan. I'm not telling you that's wrong, merely sharing with you the theory from the old works of Greek about the 5 ages. That corresponds with the theory of the 5 eras. Now, do other civilizations and belief systems have their own long cycle? Yes, and of course I say that. The Mayan long count calendar, which everybody became quite familiar with back during 2012. And yes, I'll admit I might have played a little bit of a joke on some of the other faculty, setting off a little alarm on a certain date in December in 2012. And perhaps I shouldn't have done that. But anyway, we all make mistakes in life, and that's something I'll admit that I regret. But going back to the resets are a cycle. What exactly was the Mayan long count calendar based on? The symbols, the exploration of the Mayans. What do we really know about the Mayan civilization? Yeah, I know. It was a great show and it was on for a while, and they're a great motorcycle club, fictional motorcycle club. What do we actually know about the Mayan culture, the society? Was there a direct connection to the Mayan culture and society? Is there a direct connection to the Roman culture and society? Well, the answer is no, there is not. There's a lot of remnants that we explore. There's a lot of elements of evidence that have survived, but is it actually from the civilization in the way that we think of it? Or are we only getting just the bare bones details? What I find intriguing about it is that it is the theory that we operate on cycles, and you'll see that they actually go all the way up to 157,810 years in one of the longest cycles. That's a pretty long cycle. Now, did they have knowledge that certain events, calamities may have happened? And by the way, there was a school of thought that should be known called catastrophe theory. Again, that's something else that is, for the most part, derided by science. Official science will tell you, yes, great disasters happen, but catastrophism, that's something that's easily disproven. And you shouldn't give into that theory. Anyway, there was a guy whose name started with a V who projected a lot of theories on catastrophism, and he was derided by mainstream science. And even Carl Sagan took time to call him out in Cosmos. So I think you know who he is. But then there's also the Yuga cycle. Yuga cycle, 24,000 years, breaking down different times and different ages. And again, saying that things are stuck on a giant wheel. Now, I've always said many times, what's my greatest fear? Atom bomb here. The plastic age is the element that best describes this age. Yes, I may have referred to the fifth era as the plastic age a time or two. But come on, we use plastic in a lot of different things. We really do have a civilization that's based on plastic. And let's not forget the siding that we use on most of our houses. Yes, even in the first world, or at least what we define as the first world today. Yes, someone's well aware of the name of the author. There it is, the individual who posited a theory that promoted, or at least looked at the idea of catastrophism. And it was derided by the scientific establishment quite extensively. And Old World Delaware has the other name for it, the disposable age. But you look at these different concepts of these cycles. You have the Mayan long count calendar, you have the old 5 ages from the classical Greece, and then you have the Yuga cycle. And there's many, many more, and we could be talking about them all night if we're so inclined, but really get the idea that multiple civilizations with very different belief systems, at least what we think to be very different belief systems, do share a lot of commonalities. The concept of a cycle, the concept of things being much longer than we could possibly believe. Now, official science will tell you humans only evolved from Cro-Magnon over the last 10 to 30,000 years, depending on what the prevailing scientific theories are today. And as a result, this is impossible. Whatever you do, just don't go to that early man site in this little place not too far from Yermo, California. It's right off I-15, and it's on a little road called Fort Irwin Road, if you're so inclined to see it. There's a little bit of possible evidence there that might dispute that. But is it evidence or is it just something else? And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Yuga system, and I know we're going to have to take a deep dive exploration of this at some point. I'm still gathering some more data and looking for a good way to present this, because Yuga and the whole concept of these belief systems are relatively complicated. And I feel they deserve a lot of effort to do them justice, because there are a lot of intriguing ideas. For right now, just simply take this idea that it is another cycle system, and it operates on a much more extensive timeline than we like to think, where we're talking that humans, or at least more advanced humans, existed on a longer timeline. Even the belief that some human beings live to be up to 1 million years old. Now, were they talking about physical bodies? Or were they talking about just the ethereal existence? Don't know, but when you go off of this belief system, you could really say that it's the spirit or the ethereal existence. There's many different ways to say the same thing. Vaughn with a good comment here. Creation and chaos. We can be quick to label natural order. We can, and we can also be quick to accept something as natural order when in fact it's not. It works both ways. But great comment, Vaughn, great comment. Millions of years. Yeah, it's impossible, right, David? Billions of years. Billions and billions. Remember who liked to say that? But anyway, moving on. We also have some of our origin stories. Whether it's the biblical story, the Great Flood, we're well familiar with that one. How the divine being, God, decided to reset the planet because people were evil and corrupt. And I would say there was a lot of what a government would call collateral damage in this event. But, the belief system says it was necessary. Anyway, it's just one example of an extreme reset event, a flood. There's also, I had some fun with this on the last exploration, antediluvian, although I said antediluvian because I just wanted to see if anybody bite off on that one, where we had this time frame before the Great Flood of these fantastic and colossal creatures. And oddly enough, if you match this in a parallel with the official scientific timeline of evolution, then you'll say, well, antediluvian seems to look like the time of dinosaurs, or we have a plesiosaur, we have a giant megalodon or something that's going to appear in the next Jurassic Park remake, and maybe there's even a titanoboa. But in the antediluvian period, there were these fantastic creatures, and then the flood wiped them out. There might have also been some more advanced human beings. There might have been nasty angels. Who the heck really knows? But it's an interesting theory. And it's another example of a cycle. And so don't forget that. Even if there's divergences in the details, the main themes are more or less the same. Cycles, reset. It's all there. You can see it in many different places. And so that's what keeps it very, very interesting. And it doesn't matter which culture, what language, and what origin we're reading. By the way, why do we see the whole concept of astrology being so powerful? And keep in mind, this is something else that Carl Sagan spoke against in Cosmos. He said, astrology, it doesn't really have any scientific bearing. Where the position of Jupiter is with me right now, it will not affect who I am. Yeah, he gave quite a wonderful speech on it and a little bit of a monologue. But it's interesting that people say we're in the age of Aquarius now, or we're in the age of Sagittarius, Capricorn, Virgo, Leo. Is there something behind what's represented on the zodiac? Does it represent the same cycle that we just saw, albeit in a different way? Yeah, and a lot of people do find components, if not all of astrology, to be pretty accurate. And what is the actual astrology? Do we really learn about the fine details of what it was? Was there a time that it was considered a lot more legitimate? That's the question. Now, of course, it's just like how we have a habit of, how shall we say, achieving a greater understanding of what happened in the history. Sort of like people in the Middle Ages, when I went through grade school a very long time ago, I recall being taught that people in the Middle Ages predominantly thought that the world was flat and that Columbus would sail right off the edge. That's what I was taught. And that Columbus proved them wrong, right? But now, if you go to any college course, they'll tell you, no, people in the Middle Ages knew, just like Columbus knew, that the world was round, spherical. Very interesting. How exactly would they change that perception, though? It's not as though most of the population of the Middle Ages, especially Europe, was literate, according to official history. Or were they? I don't know. It's just one of those interesting things where you try to study the history and you get many different answers. And I can't imagine why that is. So, asking you shall receive. Yeah, that's a very good point. But zodiacs are actually a lot more prominent than we like to believe. They're not just in newspapers and in random magazines. They do appear on certain college campuses, in major administration buildings, colleges that are now major universities in the United States. And this unnamed university happens to consider itself a university of science and technology. And they also have a gigantic zodiac symbol, which none of the students, by the way, at least virtually all those that believe, would ever step on. Because as the legacy goes, if you step on this zodiac symbol anywhere, you're going to fail your next test. And then you're probably going to have to repeat Lucius Aurelian's history class and really be annoyed. Because he can be a very annoying guy, especially if he sees you 2 semesters in a row. But anyway, very, very interesting. Again, on a University of Science and Technology, but there's still a very prominent zodiac symbol that's featured on the floor of one of the main administration buildings. And then also, coincidentally, on this same university, you'll find some interesting reliefs. What's this supposed to be? Lions with wings? Do we have another name for this creature? Yes, we know what that name is. We've explored it many times before, and it's a name that comes up quite frequently. Why are there griffins everywhere? Now, the official artistic inscription of this building says that this was an art project done by somebody in the 1920s. So I guess the griffin had a very major and yet forgotten phase of symbolism in American history in the 1920s. Yeah, don't ask me. Is it Griffin with a PH or is it Griffin with 2 Fs? I guess it depends on the day, right, Michael? Anyways. No, no. Why would it be there? What on earth makes you think it would be there? Oh my goodness. Anyways, but why do we have all this evidence? Why is there a zodiac on the floor of a university that's about science and technology? Why are there griffins on the same university? Why are there griffins on the Plummer building in Rochester, Minnesota? Griffins are all over the building, outside and inside the building. And check that building out if you've ever seen it. The Plummer building, Rochester, Minnesota, the major building of the mighty Mayo Clinic. Now, going back to the concept of cycles, we, of course, have the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. We have all the warnings of fire and brimstone, possibly plasma fire that may have happened in the past, and reset an entire civilization. And then, of course, you know how we talk about volcanoes. I love how volcanoes can do so many different things, especially in the official science. Now, I'm not laughing at it. I'm not deriding at it. I'm just amazed that volcanoes are so ubiquitous. I mean, if you think about this, volcanoes are really like your all-purpose Swiss Army knife for things happening in history with geology. Giant's Causeway in Ireland, formed by a volcano. Devil's Tower in Wyoming, formed by a volcano. Those very finely carved steps at nice 90-degree angles in some random location near the Rocky Mountains, formed by a volcano. You better believe it. And yet we also tie the fact that volcanoes are major components of history. For example, the Toba catastrophe theory. But remember, mainstream science does not embrace the catastrophe theories, does it? Although there is the Mount Toba catastrophe theory, there's Krakatoa, and let's not forget the year without the summer. And yet somehow somebody measured the exact amount of volcanic ejection from the year without the summer. Who did it? I don't know. Maybe it was Captain Cook's long lost grandfather, or maybe I just don't know history, but it's just something fascinating. Texas grown. The Hopi Indians had a great story on the terrestrials who were like shadow gods. Not only that, but the Hopi also have their own view of what you might call the previous eras. That seems to be relatively accurate. And we've explored it a couple times in Lost Tales and so on and so forth. Anyway, so moving on from our resets a cycle, let's take a look at evidence of past events. And what past events would we actually look at that shows us what happened in the past? What would be so interesting? I'm about to show you a very interesting image that I don't think many of you have seen before, but it's one of those images that really caught my attention in terms of evidence. And who here has ever actually seen this image before? And let me make sure you can see it on full screen. Give me 1 second here. There we go. And I'll remove the banner so you can see it in all its glory. And let me get a little closer. And what are your thoughts on this particular image? Oh, yeah, the ant people. Very, very interesting account, too, from the Hopi, Michael. Something worthwhile to explore again. Kathy says never. Vaughn, nope. Yeah, it's black and white. I mean, it's a drawing. But what do you get when, more star forts. Yeah, never a shortage of those. But what do you get when you look at this image? Yeah, a little bit of a pentagon in it, Golden Child. And what do you think about this? What do you think this really shows? Now, yes, you see down here, Bologna, another baloney drawing. But what do you see these people doing up here? It's almost as though you see these individuals that are sitting up on this incredible overlook. But what exactly are they viewing this city through? Isn't this fascinating? And has anybody been to Bologna? Is there actually a piece of terrain where you could get up on near Bologna, a hill, a ridgeline, and you can actually see the whole city like this? I'm just asking questions. Has anybody been there? Do they know exactly what the layout of the terrain looks like? Because those are the kind of questions that you have to ask. Yeah, look at that. Someone's leaning ahead in the foxhole there. Yeah, that's an old military saying. I probably shouldn't use that. Watchers, possibly. Yeah, looking into a different realm. Maybe. And KC933 says it. Wizard of Oz. Portals. Yes. This is a very, very interesting drawing. And there's a couple different citations in terms of who actually did this drawing. Now, I'm not going to bore you with the details. Allegedly, it's right down here in the image, and maybe that is the person who actually drew it. I don't know. I didn't watch anybody draw it. If history says they drew it, fine. I'm not here to argue with it. But what I'm more interested in is what this actually shows. People who just seem to be touring about, looking through some impressive viewing system I mean, this almost looks like an organic viewing screen if you take something from, I'll just say Star Trek, because that's where the viewing screen terminology was used, and it's somebody watching afar off what's supposed to be Bologna. And do we really see a city that looks like Bologna? Or was it a different city entirely? Or could it even be a Bologna in a different reality? Or was it another city? You don't know, but I find it so fascinating that there are so many images, a lot more than we realize, that show something like this. Some people that are staring through some kind of impressive viewing system and looking at an entire city. In fact, if you go to the origin of a lot of the original bird's eye views, this is what you'll get. And suddenly it creates a lot more questions. It becomes a lot more interesting. Well, there you go. And Tanya right there with a good comment. It looks destroyed. Yeah, you're right. It does look destroyed. So maybe it was right after the reset and they were planning their next move, or maybe they were just really watchers who don't interfere. Great comment right there, Charles. Yes, could have been anywhere. Absolutely. Anywhere, anytime, at any point. But I just thought that's an interesting artistic rendition to ever show. Why would anybody think of doing this from our official history and justify this from the 16 or 1700s or whenever this was drawn, or even the 1800s? Why would anybody draw something like this? It's to show the high-minded Victorian society looking down on the unfortunates. Really? Is that what it shows? Or does it show something else? I guess it's ultimately up to your interpretation. It's just intriguing to me. And now, of course, many people have seen all the sketches that we have of Rome or ancient Rome here from the Capitoline Hill. Now, this drawing is attributed to Ken Walsh, although I don't know if that's the actor Ken Walsh or the artist, not really sure. But Rome is another one of those interesting anomalies because the official history tells us that people in Europe and Italy forgot about the existence of Rome, even though the evidence was all over the place. It was all around. And yet somehow people forgot about the existence of Rome. Of course, if you watch the TV series The Last Kingdom, and there's a guy who was a Briton, a Saxon, and then an adopted Viking who seemed to be aware of Rome in 800s Britain, which was very fascinating. Yet official history says we were constantly rediscovering Rome. Or was it something else? What we're looking at here is somebody else actually looking at this. Was this the remains of an entirely different civilization? Were they watchers? Were they overseers? Were they something else? We just don't know, but we have a lot of hints and a lot of clues. And you'll find in this evidence, let me make sure I get the banner back up so everybody knows exactly where we are. Evidence of past events. Very, very strange things. Very anomalous things where you have people that seem to be poking around the ruins, surveying them. I mean, these were supposedly always here, were they not? They were here for hundreds of years. Why would this be unique to anybody? Or wouldn't somebody be actually looking to repurpose these, salvage these, use these? This was during a time when people were poor. This was not the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, but maybe a survey crew from the University of Bologna could have come to Rome and cleaned this up. I don't know. But no, it just sat there neglected for hundreds of years until somebody decided to clean it up. Now, does anybody know where this image, print, whatever you want to call it, is from? Hint, we've already seen this particular location, but I always like this one because it kind of gives you a different impression of something that's going on. Well, that's a good point, Silver. Were they the inheritors or were they something else? Amsterdam, not a bad guess. One would think it would be Amsterdam, wouldn't they? Well, I'll just go ahead and tell you. We're actually looking at another look at Berlin. Yes, odd. I don't recall there being a lot of canals in Berlin, but it was in the past, sure, why not? And some very interesting architecture. And yes, we're all well aware of the destruction on Berlin, especially at the end of World War II. It wasn't just that it was bombed, there was also a massive land battle that occurred there, and that'll destroy things. You also have other interesting sketches here. This is attributed to 1562. Again, I don't know. Showing some very advanced ruins in Rome. Of course, intriguing because during this same time frame, the people of Europe and across Italy were building massive advanced cathedrals or cathedral basilicas or other impressive religious buildings. But then we also had these remnants that were still around that were being cataloged. It's one of those intriguing details that we see a lot of times. Ah, yes, Berlin. There is a river that goes through the center of the city. There is. And it's interesting to see how the rivers played different roles through the official history. Now, of course, what people will tell you is yes, it's because the city had a river. That's how they achieved these logistical, incredible feats. I suppose so. But it goes back and forth many different times. And it's amazing how sharp words can be. Oh, very true, Vaughn. Words can have a lot of power or they can have no power whatsoever. And Texas grown. I almost said Germany. I was just gifted photos from there during World War II. Looked like that. All the buildings and the communist blocks. Very, very true. There was also a book from Stars and Stripes, U.S. military publication, that issued all the U.S. service members, or they could buy it, I think, when they went on their tours of duty or deployments to Germany, back when the United States maintained a large military presence in what used to be West Germany, but now it's all Germany. So very, very interesting when you see these. Now, were these drawings documenting these structures? And were there drawings that documented this kind of structure? Again, in the good old Berlin Palace, quite impressive. Almost looks like some sort of advanced Capitol building, or if we're in the United States, we definitely label this as some sort of state capitol. If it's in Europe, then it must be some sort of palace. But yet they look so much the same, do they not? So what's really the difference? Is this part of the evidence of what we have of the previous civilization in the fourth era? Those are the questions that we always have and that we're trying to answer. And moving on from this one, you go to the other drawings. So what is going on here? You look at these drawings and it looks like there's some kind of excavation that's going on. But remember, we're informed that Rome was rediscovered many times, even though most of these ruins were just sitting there for hundreds of years, right after the fall of Rome, depending on when you think the sack of Rome happened in accordance with the official history. And did the Carolingian Empire really exist? Did the Holy Roman Empire exist? Did the many different city-states of Italy exist? Maybe. Or maybe they existed on a much shorter timeline. These images, though, seem to convey multiple meanings. I mean, it appears that there's some sort of excavation effort going on. There's a lot of dirt and debris that's all over the place. Now, you could just say, well, it was hundreds of years. It got buried by dirt. Yeah, where exactly does that dirt come from? Not exactly sure. And, people ask that question with the mud flood theory. Where'd all the mud come from? Don't know. It's a theory. Yeah, it could have come from airships for all we know. Could have come from some weapon that went awry. It could have been some natural event that involved a complete change of the land itself. And so that's what keeps it very interesting, because you'll find drawings like this all over the place. And yet some of these drawings are incredibly detailed. And the remnants that they document are very detailed. Yes, I guess this is all just from the Romans. This survived a long period of time? Maybe. Or is it just a partial depiction of what's actually happening? Not really sure, because unless you were actually there when this was all going down, it's still rather interesting to me that this just sat around for hundreds of years. And yet when you look at some of these drawings, you'll see some very advanced designs of construction. Now, yes, official history admits that the Pantheon is a very advanced building that's almost 2,000 years old and has the largest unreinforced concrete dome on it to this day, despite the fact that we say, science says that we can match Roman concrete. I don't know, maybe we can. But then you go back to this other interesting drawing of early Berlin. And I can't help but notice that the activities of the people in the city just don't seem to correspond to what we actually see with the grandeur of the architecture. It's just really difficult to reconcile people going around in horses and carts and building structures like this. And truth be told, it's difficult to imagine people doing it with all the trains and all the other incredible wonders of modern technology and our logistical system that we have today. I mean, just imagine if you could call Amazon and they could deliver you a giant dome like this day after tomorrow, and you're going to get some contractors to put up this giant dome. I know I'm being facetious, and people try to say, well, they only built one incredible building per town or city. Well, we know that's absolutely wrong. And even in places like Nebraska, Indiana, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and of course, Iowa, there are lots of incredible structures like this in very small towns. Houses. Well, you'll just say wealthy people decided to build an incredible house somewhere in the middle of a small town. Why? Why would they do that? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. And here's the actual image of Berlin. So you can see that these very much were real structures that existed in the state. And oddly enough, in this image, now, again, not really sure about the veracity of this image, you've got a couple of horses and carts over here. Can you really see people with just horses and carts building all this? And yes, the answer will be, well, they had trains. They could have just done it with trains. Of course, how many of these structures are actually built once they even had trains? Or again, does the official history say that they were built before the trains? And Sean recognizes it right there. Yeah, always empty or always very, very sparse activity. How interesting. Oh, yeah. And funny you mention that, Golden Child. Pyramids in the Bible called the Great Mounds of Egypt. Isn't it funny that we have a lot of mounds all across the United States still, too, don't we? Especially if we go to Cahokia and even up in Wisconsin, they've got some mounds there, not too far off of I-94 between Milwaukee and Madison. So very, very interesting, all this evidence that we have of these remnants. But now we go into some artwork, some drawings from a draughtsman, a French architect who decided to get into fantasy drawing, apparently, because he had so much time on his hands in the late 1700s or early 1800s, depending on, again, what you find with the history. This guy imagined and drew these incredibly large and ornate detailed structures, mega structures, if you will. Yet, oddly enough, he would put other structures that still exist, incredible columns by them. So what exactly was this? This is the works of Bouilly, Etienne Bouilly, not to be confused with Etienne Navarre. And yes, I see Rutger Hauer for some reason. But yes, another one of these incredible draughtsmen who was an architect who apparently had time to draw these incredible, fantastical renderings of these buildings. Now, officially, these are just drawings from his imagination, put to paper. But is it possible that he was not actually drawing anything from his mind? He was actually recording what he saw. Now you're probably asking, well, if a structure this large ever once existed, certainly there must be remnants of it somewhere, right? Well, is it possible that a structure this large, a megastructure like this, could be destroyed to the point that we don't recognize it? What are your thoughts? Oh, Vision of Camelot. Yes, an old Camelot there. So, Chassis, people could really draw back then. Yes, they really could, couldn't they? So, Michael from Another Dimension. Ah. Yeah, good old Bouilly. And yeah, this guy was imaginative beyond our abilities to even imagine. So let's take a look at some more of Bouilly's works. Oh yes, his giant, incredible, multi-layered leveled pyramid, where you got some individuals walking around the outside of it. Now, maybe you could say, is this what the Great Pyramid looked like? Is this supposed to be set in Egypt, or is this something else entirely? I don't know. Did he go down further into Africa? Go to Sudan, maybe, and this is what it looked like? I don't know. Or was this just all from his mind? Well, again, officially, this was all from his mind. Colossal pyramids. Well, we have seen colossal pyramids before. There's still one that exists. But then there's other interesting drawings that he did, cross sections, that really seem to show an understanding of the layout of these structures, as though someone was actually trying to preserve all this detail for some reason. Now, really think about this. Yeah, good comment right there. Different era. Vaughn, for laser precision, wouldn't you need a laser? Yeah, one would think. I mean, how is somebody going to do this with hammer and chisel? I mean, we always say the answer to how the Romans did this and all these other civilizations we had is that they had forced labor, that they used slaves, and that was the answer. But you look at a lot of this, and no matter how many individuals you would have used in forced labor, and by the way, that is the official history with the construction of the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, that they had forced labor, and when the workers died, they just replaced them. Yet they were able to achieve this level of detail. They were able to achieve this level of geometric precision using forced labor. I don't know. I mean, to me, it's quite a bit of stretch. So maybe they had some other capability. Or again, maybe it was all just from the incredible imagination of Bouilly, and he had that imagination. And why is it any time I try to show this image, it never comes in a very clear format? I just don't know why. Yes, what's supposed to be a library with a giant hole in the top of the building. How exactly does that make any sense? Not really sure. But yeah, that's one of the drawings he did, so okay. But then in some of these other ones, you can see some of the detail. And by the way, we do see examples of this detail, both in structures that still exist to this day, and other structures that have been lost. Penn Station. And so you'll see this in the ceilings and structures that are stated to have been constructed in the early 1900s or the late 1800s, yes, across the United States. But really look at the depth of this one. How many columns do we have here? How extensive is this? How difficult would this be to construct at any point in history, whether it's today or if it was, what we think of as 100 AD or 100 CE or whatever we're calling the time system. 100 New Republic, right? Oh, I miss Star Wars Legends. Give me Admiral Thrawn any day. But anyways, this is one of the more elaborate structures. And if you want an idea of scale that Bouley was going for here, these are people. Can you imagine a structure like this? Some kind of super Capitol building, or maybe it had some other purpose entirely from what we understand. And just imagine someone even conceptualizing a structure like this. Let me move the banner so you can see it a little better. And I'll even remove the speaking portion, but that just gives you an idea. How long would that have taken to find all those materials? What kind of effort would it have taken to do that? And I know the answer is going to be, it was just a sketch from a guy who was a little bit out there, but he was a very good drawer. He was a draughtsman, and this all came from his mind. Nobody would ever think of building a structure like this, so why would he spend his time drawing it? It's just another one of those interesting anomalies that we have, and there's no shortage of anomalies. And that's what always keeps it so interesting. And Bouley is not the only one who did works like this. These colossal megastructures that seem to be beyond the ability of anybody to construct at any point in time. Now, I'm sure there's somebody out there that'll say that, yes, somebody had the ability to build something like this. How interesting. Very, very interesting. We always have domes. But who's really building domes now? And then, of course, what was the actual purpose of these structures if they did exist? What grander technological applications may they have had? Could these structures themselves have been part of some larger world machine even? Well, there you go. Maybe some of our mountains once looked like this. Entirely possible, Reality Elevator, and maybe that event's a lot more recent than we realize. And that's why we have all these structures everywhere. And so that's the evidence. We do have some hard evidence. We have a lot of drawings. I mean, just look at the interior of this. How long would this have taken to do all of these indentations, all these impressions, building all of these columns? Now, you might say, yes, there is a structure in Africa that kind of resembles this that we're informed the Egyptians were working on for 1,000 years or longer. I guess people spent 1,000 years building structures, and if you want to accept that, be my guest, and it was practical. See, it beats that cathedral in Cologne where it only took them a couple hundred years to do. But yes, these are the drawings that we have. And then, of course, the cenotaph. Yes. Apparently some sort of planetarium, or did it have some other use entirely? You'll find other sketches of the cenotaph that Bouley apparently designed, and it may have had many different applications and uses. Was it some kind of signal system? Was it some kind of power generating technology? Or did it have some purpose we can't even begin to imagine? Again, we can only speculate. But yes, as Donna Marie says, they are very beautiful in many different formats. So who knows exactly what they really represented or what their true purpose was, but they do exist. I mean, is this some kind of power system? Is this generating some sort of portal? Or is this even generating maybe something that could act as some sort of luminary that then gets cast into the sky? I don't know. And maybe that's just my fantastic imagination running away with things. It's just a drawing by some guy from France in the late 1700s who had a great imagination and was very, very skilled with his ability to draw. Or maybe, just maybe, he was drawing what he actually saw. And you can look up the drawings of Bouley, and many of them have survived. And are they all from him? I don't know. But there's some odd perspectives. For example, how exactly did he get this drawing? What exactly was this structure? And why does it coincidentally look similar to structures that we saw that we were told were temporary at certain expositions all around the land? Whether those expositions were in France, the United States, Germany, it didn't matter. You had no shortage of examples of extraordinary structures like this. Apparently made out of cardboard, paper mache, stucco, temporarily constructed, and yet somehow wind and water resistant. Don't ask me how they did it. But just to show you that there's a little bit more to these buoy drawings than we realize, does anybody know what this is and where this image is from? And we have covered this before and we have explored it before. Ah, that's a good point. Portal. Yep. Drawings or photos? Turn to drawings. You know what? I don't know, Divinity. Maybe so. Maybe so. Hey, Carol, good to see you. And you are exactly right. Let me get that up. Water reservoir in New York City. You are correct, Carol. The Croton Water Reservoir. And we've explored it before. And it was one of those colossal structures that existed, part of the water system officially in New York City in the distant past. And then here's another angle of it. And you can find a lot of images of this and show that it's very well documented. And yet it seems to be, well, how shall we say, out of place. Someone was building an incredible water reservoir system in New York City in the 1800s. Well, of course, there were half a thousand people there in 1850, according to the official census. And we'll not talk about how the census figures are sometimes difficult to trace. So anyway, let's go to the final part that you've been waiting for. What would the sixth era look like? What would happen if, for whatever reason, there was a reset? And, you're going to ask me, do I know when the next reset's going to be? The answer is no, I don't know. I don't pretend to know. Maybe somebody else out there will tell you that they know, and maybe they do. But, if somebody knew, why the heck would they share that information? That would be my first question. But you know what? I don't know. You come to your own conclusions. But what would it look like in the sixth era? Would the entire nature of the land be completely changed? Would it be something that we don't even recognize? Something that we might even define as, dare I say, fantasy or alien? That's what always makes it very, very intriguing. Anyways, one second here. All right. Well, is the sixth era the peak? That's what we don't know. What's it really showing and what's it really about? What would it be about? What kind of civilization or society would it be? Now, yes, if you haven't figured it out, I'm using some Roger Dean artwork because Roger Dean did some very inspired artwork for a number of different band album covers because it really stood out. But maybe, just maybe, this could be what a new land would look like after another reset. Something we don't necessarily recognize. Now, granted, this is more of the, how shall we say, optimistic outlook that maybe the sixth era would go back to perhaps a more natural format and integrating architecture to the existing environment, as it's clear happened in the past, especially with the star forts. I mean, I'm not going to try to argue and tell you that a pencil skyscraper looks like it fits into the natural environment well, but maybe you think it does, and that's okay. It's a matter of opinion. But really, the whole point of this is just to understand how different things can be. Now, if you're familiar with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien, what I always found interesting with J.R.R. Tolkien is that he posited, or at least in his fantasy world, Arda, this is all just in his mind, and keep in mind the background of Lord of the Rings and the works of Tolkien are rather amazing and extensive. And keep in mind, this is a guy that invented languages too, the languages that didn't exist, but enough on that. But getting to the point, he had a theory, or rather in his story, his fantasy story, Arda, or the world, had different shapes of the land. There were different concepts and layouts of the land. And after each reset, the land looked very different, or as he called them, ages. See, it's all the same terminology, ages, eras. But then, even more interestingly, after enough time in the second age, the land went from being a flat disk, if you will, and changed into a sphere. What an interesting idea. Where have we seen this all before? And, there's other elements to how the land may have changed further. But it's just a fantasy story. I'm not saying that applies to reality. The idea is intriguing, though. How the land could change in radical and ways that we don't even understand. Or if you want another example from the dystopian concept, look at the Cursed Earth, or the world from Judge Dredd. No, I'm not going to try to defend the original Judge Dredd with Sylvester Stallone. Read the original comics. Again, nothing against Sylvester Stallone in that film. Yeah, it had some good production values, but less said about it, the better. Watch the one with Carl Urban. Yeah, it's an example of a 21st century movie that I think captured the source material a little bit better. But bottom line up front, you have vast destroyed portions of land and the surviving population crowded into large cities. And if you remember our Hive City exploration, we looked at what that concept would be like, where people on the top hierarchy of society lived higher in the city, and people on the lower rungs of society lived to the surface, or dare I say, even in the subsurface. Again, just an idea. Or could we have another concept like this, where the layout of the lands changes completely, much like Tolkien has suggested, and much like scientists theorize happened? Oh my goodness. What have I been missing? Hey, Katie wants to go. Thanks for that. Sorry, I missed that. Didn't get the alerts until later. And welcome, Rainer. Thanks for joining us. But there's different ways that it could really look. There's other things that we do see, different kinds of lands that could lay out in the 6th era. And we do see this with the concept of Pangaea, Rodinia, but science says this happened a very long time ago. Hundreds of millions of years, billions of years, in a long enough timeline, anything can happen. What if it were possible, though, this could happen in, say, 10 years from now, or even 100 years from now? Well, you'd be told it was impossible. And then, of course, there's some of the more, how shall we say, interesting theories about what the shape of the land may be. Although if you've ever read the novel Discworld series, again, it's just a hypothetical fantasy novel. It does happen to share some similarities with things that have been depicted. And, of course, science says these things are not possible, and they're scientifically disproven. Maybe so. Or maybe there's something more to it than either the science or the fantasy fully grasps. We've explored Hyperborea, or the Legend of Hyboria, from the works of Conan. And that was an interesting exploration, and seeing the layout of the land and how different it was, and an entirely different concept of the movements of people, and yet something looking rather familiar. Also, if you look at the map of Game of Thrones, you'll find that it's kind of familiar too. I can't imagine why. And then going back and trying to deconflict that with the concept of the Yugas. And so suddenly we have all these different images. Now, this is some interesting imagery that was pulled up that shows some interesting and very geographic or geometrically precise objects that exist in the terrain. Now, some people actually call this a little bit of a commonality or a companion to the Nazca lines. I've been to the Middle East several times, and I can tell you there are some very interesting anomalies within the terrain there. Of course, there's anomalies all over the terrain. And what does this really represent? Does this represent remnants of the past? And if it does, then what would really remain of our current era in the 6th era? Well, we like to say it's the plastic era. So the only thing that would really remain then would probably be the structures from the 4th era and the foundations of the earlier eras, just like they showed in Logan's Run. Nobody knows for sure. I mean, what would happen to the Empire State Building if we had a reset? Would it survive? Would some component of it survive into the 6th era and they try to explain it? Would we get another interesting movie with Tom Cruise standing on top of the Empire State Building? I don't know. And by the way, Oblivion wasn't that bad of a movie. It had some great visuals in it. But it's interesting to think about and try to really bring out in many different ways. And that's why it fascinates me, and that's why I wonder what the 6th era would actually look like. Or would it go back to the dystopian concept of the terrifying hive cities, which we've explored? And some can even argue that we have a version of hive cities that exist to this day. And then what if the land is completely misshapen and our actual existence is something beyond our imagination? That we aren't on a ball, we aren't on a flat disk, we're not in a tesseract or a hypercube, we're in something that we can't even begin to understand. Or maybe we are now, and after the next reset, we'll be in something that we don't understand. That's what keeps it very, very interesting. Lee knows exactly where I was going with that. Yes, the walled city of Kowloon. It no longer exists. But if you watch the film Bloodsport, yes, that one with Jean-Claude Van Damme from the 1980s, you get to see the interior of the walled city of Kowloon. They actually filmed several scenes with it. His epic confrontation with Forrest Whitaker and his buddy who were trying to bring him back for going AWOL from, what was he in, the Air Force, the Army? It doesn't really matter, but yeah, quite interesting. It's all there. Yes, remnants of buildings in the side of mountains, all over the place. All over the place. No, you see, Reality Elevator, I've got a little, I'm not ever going to have any issues with that because I respect what's happened in Hollywood. And, I may have participated at one point in time. If you build it, he will come. Anyways. Well, I hope you all enjoyed this exploration. Oh, wait a minute. How did I get there? Thank you very much, Schooner West, and welcome to the new members. I greatly appreciate that. Remember that all of this is theoretical. I'm not trying to pass any of this off as fact. And as I'll always say, it could be possible that the mainstream history, the science, is all exactly correct as we see it. But that requires us to ignore a lot of things. A lot of the things that we just went over in this exploration. A lot of structures that you can still explore. And no, you don't have to go to the Middle East. You don't have to go to Iowa. They'll be right in your backyard. They'll be your local municipal buildings. Any city, anywhere in the land, you can find many different examples that show you all of these concepts that we talked about in this exploration, indicating that there was something else that happened that we're not exactly aware of, that might deviate from our current understanding of the who, what, where, when, and why of our historical account. Oh, well, maybe, Robert, maybe. I actually got in trouble with some mushrooms and a horse, but that's a conversation for another time. So, well, thank you much, Kathy. I appreciate that. In any event, that's all we have for this exploration. I hope you enjoyed the next reset, Forward to the Sixth Era. And coming this week, we're going to take a look at some interesting evidence that's a little bit more direct in terms of the good old mud flood in some areas that we haven't explored before. So look out for that. Anyway, prior to departing, please hit that like button. Thank you, everybody, for supporting the channel, and have a great week wherever you are in the land. This is Lucius Aurelian signing off, and thank you for joining me.